The Complete Philosophy of James Allen. A sleep essay from Vesperal Books. There is a story told about a small town on the north coast of Devon in the years just after the turn of the last century. Before dawn, while the streets are still dark and the sea is only a sound below the cliffs, a man leaves a house on Broad Park Avenue and walks up through the sleeping town to a stone outlook above the water. He sits there for an hour, saying nothing, doing nothing, watching the light arrive slowly over the sea. Then he walks back down and writes in a small and patient hand about the power of quiet thought. His name is James Allen, and outside a small circle of readers, hardly anyone in his own lifetime knows it. Tonight we are going to spend a long, slow while in his company. We will follow the shape of his life, which was brief and outwardly uneventful, and the shape of his philosophy, which fits inside a few small books and has quietly outlasted almost everything else his age produced. Nothing here will be urgent, and nothing will be asked of you. You do not need to remember any of this, and you do not need to stay awake for it. If these words carry you toward sleep, that is exactly what they are for, and they will go on gently without you. His books themselves, read whole and unabridged, live on this channel whenever you want them. For now there is only a dark coast, a stone seat above the sea, and a man who believed that everything begins with a thought. Chapter 1. The Man Who Left School at 15. Every philosophy has a house it grew up in, and this one grew up in narrow circumstances. James Allen was born in Leicester, a working town in the middle of England, in the year 1864, the son of a man who earned his living in the textile trade. Picture the town as the century wanes, brick streets and mill chimneys and the steady hum of looms, a place organized around work and wages. Nothing about that setting suggests that a boy born into it will one day write one of the most widely read books of practical philosophy in the English language. That is part of the quiet appeal of this story. It begins about as far from fame as a life can begin, and it never really moves toward fame at all. Fame comes later, on its own, long after the man is gone. While James was still a boy, the family business failed. His father traveled to America to look for work, hoping to recover what had been lost, and there he died, robbed and murdered, so far as the record shows. The record of those years is thin, and Allen himself, in his books, almost never speaks of his own life, so we will not imagine scenes or invent feelings for him. Whatever that news did to the household in Leicester, it belongs to them and not to us. What we can speak of is the practical consequence, because it shaped everything that followed. At about 15, James left school and went to work, because the family needed whatever he could earn. Hold that for a moment, because it is the hinge of the whole story. The man who would become one of the most influential writers on the power of the mind received, by the standards of his own century, hardly any formal education at all. There was no university, no learned society, no circle of literary friends. There was a boy of about 15 with a family to help support, and after him a young man doing the patient, invisible work that towns like Leicester ran on. For years he earned his living as a private secretary in English manufacturing firms, which meant correspondence and accounts and other men's business, meant being trusted, organized and discreet, and meant long stretches of ordinary time in ordinary offices. If his books feel tested against real life, this may be why. They were not written from a mountain or a library. So far as we can tell, they were worked out slowly, in the margins of an employed man's day. It is worth saying plainly that this is nearly all we have of those years. Alan's life is one of the most thinly documented of any widely read author, and the honest telling of it is mostly silence, a boy, a loss, a long stretch of quiet employment. Nobody was watching, and nobody thought to keep records of a secretary in a manufacturing firm. Whatever was forming in him through those years formed privately, and we will meet it only where he chose to show it, in the books. There is something fitting in that, for a man whose subject was the hidden life of thought. Around the turn of the century, when he was in his middle 30s, the writing began to come out of the margins. A first book appeared around 1901, and then, in 1903, came the small book on which everything since has rested, a book you can read in well under an hour, called As a Man Thinketh. He took the title from the book of Proverbs, from the old sentence, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." The whole of his philosophy is folded inside that borrowed line, and he knew it, which is perhaps why he never claimed the idea as his own. He presented himself not as a discoverer, but as a reminder, someone pointing calmly at a truth he believed had always been there. The story goes that Alan thought the little book too slight to publish, and that it was his wife, Lily, who persuaded him to let it go into the world. If that is true, it is one of the gentler ironies in the history of books, because the volume he doubted became the one the world kept. Even its foreword is an apology of sorts. He calls it suggestive rather than explanatory, not a treatise but a spur, meant to stimulate men and women to the discovery of the truth that, in his words, they themselves are makers of themselves. Mind, he writes there, is the master weaver, both of the inner garment of character and the outer garment of circumstance. And his hope for his readers is simply that, as they may have hitherto woven in ignorance and pain, they may now weave in enlightenment and happiness. A weaver's metaphor from a textile worker's son. He signed that forward from Broad Park Avenue, in Ilfracombe, a small town on the coast of Devon, where he had settled at about that time, with the sea at the end of the streets. It is in Ilfracombe that the life takes on the shape people still tell of, and here we should be honest about what is known and what is only handed down. Alan's life is thinly documented, and much of what is said about his days is tradition rather than record. But the tradition is consistent, and it goes like this. Early each morning, before the town was properly awake, he would walk up to a stone outlook above the sea and spend something like an hour there in quiet, thinking, or perhaps not even thinking, simply being still. Then he would come down and write through the morning. In the afternoon he worked in his garden. In the evening there was conversation and reading, and the small society of a small town. It is said that this round hardly varied. Whether or not every detail is exact, the picture agrees with the books, which read from first to last, like the work of a man who kept a quiet schedule and asked very little of the world. The work itself accumulated gently. He wrote roughly a book a year, 19 or so in all by the end, each one small, each one circling the same few convictions about thought and character and peace. With Lily, he edited a modest magazine devoted to the same ideas, read by the same scattered readership. There were no crowds and no fortunes. This was a cottage industry of the spirit, conducted by the sea, and it supported a simple life and no more. He died in 1912, at 47, little known outside the circle of people who read him. Lily carried the work forward, continuing the magazine and keeping his books in print, which is one reason there were books left to discover. And then, slowly, the discovery happened. In the century since, As a Man Thinketh has sold in the millions, in countless editions, passed from hand to hand in the way that only very small and very clear books are passed. It is widely credited as a foundation stone of the whole modern literature of self-improvement. Writers from Napoleon Hill's generation onward have named it as an influence, and through them its ideas reached audiences. Allen never dreamed of addressing. Sit with the strangeness of that for a moment, unhurried. An entire century of success literature, loud, confident, and vast, rests in significant part on the quietest imaginable foundation. A secretary from Leicester who left school at about 15, lived by the sea, gardened in the afternoons, and died before the world knew his name. The genre he seeded chases outcomes. He wrote almost entirely about what a person is. And it may be exactly this that has kept him readable while louder books fell away, because he never promises the reader the world, only the slow mastery of the one instrument each of us actually holds, which is our own mind. That is the man. In the chapters ahead, we will walk through what he taught, one idea at a time, beginning where he begins, with the claim that thought makes character, and character makes a life. There is no need to hold on to the biography. It will wait for us, the way the sea waited for him each morning. For now, simply keep the image of a man on a stone seat above the water, letting the day arrive without hurrying it, and let your own day, wherever you are, be just as finished as his. Chapter 2. The Garden of the Mind. Think of an English garden at the end of an afternoon in early summer. The beds have been weeded, the rows are staked and tied, and the gardener is moving slowly along the path with the light going soft behind the wall. Nothing dramatic is happening, and nothing dramatic ever does happen here. What happens is tending, day after day, the same small acts of choosing and clearing, and out of that tending in its own season, everything else comes. This is the image at the very center of James Allen's philosophy, and this chapter belongs to it alone. Allen's whole teaching begins with one claim, made in the first pages of As a Man Thinketh, and never softened afterward. A man is what he thinks, not what he says, not what he owns, not even in the first instance what he does, because for Allen, The doing always comes second. Character, as he understands it, is nothing more mysterious than the complete sum of a person's thoughts, gathered over years the way a garden gathers what has been planted in it. The thoughts we choose and encourage, the ones we return to and dwell in, are not commentary on our life. They are the material our life is made of. He roots this in the oldest image of growth there is. As the plant springs from, and could not be without, the seed, so every act of a man springs from the hidden seeds of thought, he writes. There is no act without a seed, and there is no seed that came from nowhere. Even the acts we call spontaneous, the flare of temper, the sudden kindness, the impulse we claim surprised us, are for Alan simply seeds we had already been keeping, germinating out of sight until conditions favored them. Our acts flower out of our thinking, and what we harvest from those acts, sweet or bitter, we ourselves have grown. If you want to know what a man has been thinking for 20 years, he suggests, you need only look at what his life has quietly come to produce. And then comes the sentence on which everything turns. A man's mind, Alan writes, may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild, but whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. Stay with the second half of that sentence, because it is the part people miss. The mind has no neutral setting. There is no leaving it fallow, no pausing the growth while we attend to other things. If no useful seeds are put into it, Alan says, then useless seeds will drift in on their own, an abundance of them, and they will produce after their kind just as faithfully as anything planted on purpose. Neglect, in other words, is not the absence of gardening. Neglect is a gardening decision, and the crop it yields is weeds. This sounds stern until you notice how homely the remedy is. Alan does not ask for anything heroic. He asks for what a gardener does. A gardener keeps the plot, pulling out what is wrong and useless and impure, and cultivating toward perfection what is right and useful and pure, a little at a time, in all weathers, without expecting the work to ever be finished. A person who tends thought this way, Alan promises, sooner or later makes a discovery, which is that he is not the garden's victim, but its keeper, the master gardener of his soul, the director of his life. Not the owner of a finished paradise, the keeper of a working plot, with soil under his nails and tomorrow's weeding already waiting. Notice what this quietly does away with. If character is grown, then character is not conferred. A noble nature, Alan insists, is not a matter of luck or favor or inheritance, not a gift handed to some and withheld from others. It is the natural result of long continuing in right thought, the way an orchard is the natural result of long planting, and an ignoble nature is grown by exactly the same law working on different seed. Cause and effect, he says, are as exact and undeviating in the hidden world of thought as in the visible world of things. Corn does not come up as nettles, and nettles do not come up as corn, and everyone accepts this in the field who forgets it entirely in the mind. At first, hearing that exactness can sound cold, but stay with it a moment, because Alan means it as the warmest news in the book. Character, he says, is growth under law, not a making by luck or favour, and a law that never bends against us is a law that never bends against us either way. It means the careless thought is never free, true, but it means just as surely that the patient thought is never wasted. A gardener does not plant in hope that the law of growth will be in a good mood this year. He plants because the law can be trusted, absolutely, in the hidden realm of thought as in the soil, and everything he does is done leaning on that trust. Each of us, on this view, is self-made in both directions, and Alan states the double edge without flinching. In the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. He also fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace, he writes of man. The same forge, the same fire, the same hands. Nothing outside the workshop decides whether what comes off the anvil tonight is a weapon or a tool. That is decided by the pattern being worked to, and the pattern is thought. Between the two extremes, he says, lie all the grades of character, and every one of them is made in the same shop. If this were the whole teaching, it might feel like a heavy sentence passed on everyone who has ever thought carelessly, which is to say everyone. But Alan folds a strange mercy into it. Man is always the master, he says, even at his weakest and most abandoned. The trouble is that in his weakness he is a foolish master, one who misgoverns his own house, and then stands in the wreckage blaming the weather. The mastery is never taken from us. It is only unused or used badly, and the whole turn of a life begins, in Alan's telling, at the moment a person starts to reflect on his condition and to search for the law on which his being stands. Reflection is the foolish master remembering his keys. He is honest that the search is work. Gold and diamonds, he reminds his readers, are found only by searching and mining, and the truths of our own nature lie at least as deep as gold. The digging he prescribes is unglamorous. Watch your thoughts, control and alter them, gently, one at a time. Trace their effects on yourself, on the people around you, on the circumstances of your days, linking cause to effect with patient practice, using even the smallest everyday experience as material. It is the gardener's method applied inward, weeding and planting and waiting, and its rewards arrive the way harvests do, slowly, and then all at once. Heard at night, half awake, the teaching becomes something simpler still. You do not have to remake your mind before morning. No garden was ever weeded in a night, and none ever had to be. To notice one thought kindly, to set down one worry the way a tool is set down against a wall, is already the work, the whole of it in miniature. And if, somewhere among these rows of words, your attention loosens and begins to drift, let it drift. A garden does not mind being watched by someone half asleep, and nothing said, "Tonight needs to be kept." There is one more comfort in the image, and it may be why Alan chose it. A garden does not grow while the gardener strains over it. It grows at night, in the rain, while his back is turned, while he sleeps. The tending is ours. The growing was never ours to do. So the beds are weeded now, as well as they will be weeded today, and the light is gone behind the wall, and the gardener has gone in. The garden goes on growing in the dark, all by itself, and that is the whole comfort of it, and it is enough. Chapter 3. The Mirror of Circumstance. Picture a small harbour on a windless night. The boats are still, the town has put its lamps on, and the water, with nothing to disturb it, holds a second town upside down. Every light doubled, every window answered. The water is not trying to do this. Reflection is simply what still water does. Alan asks us to see the circumstances of a life in the same way, as a dark water that faithfully gives back the state of the mind above it. And that single idea, circumstance as mirror, is the whole of this chapter. The idea follows from the garden, and Alan presents it as the garden's second half. Thought and character are one, he says, and character cannot be seen directly. It can only show itself through environment and circumstance, the way a plant can only show what its seed contained. So the outer conditions of a person's life, he claims, will always be found to be harmoniously related to the inner state. But notice at once how carefully he fences that claim, because this is where he is most often misread. He does not say that a man's circumstances at any given moment display his entire character. He says that circumstances are connected to some vital element of thought within him, in such a way that, for now, they are exactly what his development requires. The mirror shows something true. It does not show everything. Where we are, then, is never accident. Every man, Alan writes, is where he is by the law of his being, brought there by the thoughts he has built into his character. And this is just as true, he adds, of those who feel entirely out of place in their lives as of those who feel at home in them. But the point of being where we are is not sentence, it is schooling. As a growing and evolving being, a man is placed where he may learn, and when he has learned what a circumstance holds for him, that circumstance passes away. Alan says, and other circumstances take its place, the lesson dissolving as soon as it is finished. Seen this way, a difficult season is not a verdict on the soul. It is a page the soul has not finished reading. There is a hinge in this teaching, and Alan marks it plainly. A man is buffeted by his circumstances, he says, as long as he believes himself the creature of outside conditions, a cork on other people's water. But when he realizes that he is himself a creative power, that the soil and the hidden seeds out of which his circumstances grow are within him and may be commanded, then he comes into his own mastery. The change is not first a change of conditions. It is a change of direction, from arguing with the mirror to attending to what stands before it. What the mirror answers to, Alan insists, is not our wishes, but our substance. The soul attracts that which it secretly harbours, that which it loves, and also that which it fears. It reaches the height of its cherished aspirations. It falls to the level of its unchastened desires, he writes. Secretly is the word that carries the weight. It is not the resolutions we announce that are planted in us, but the thoughts we actually keep, the loved ones and the feared ones alike. and fear, in his account, sows just as faithfully as love. Circumstance, he says, is simply the means by which the soul receives what is already its own. Then comes the sentence that has outlived almost everything else he wrote. Men do not attract that which they want, but that which they are. Our whims and ambitions, he goes on, are thwarted at every step, while our inmost thoughts and desires are fed with their own food, whether it is foul or clean. A man may want calm and be made of hurry. The mirror will show hurry. He may pray for one life while thinking another, and Allen is gently unsparing here, for prayers, as he understands them, are answered only when they agree with how a man actually thinks and acts. Wanting is loud and weightless. Being is quiet, and it is the only thing the water reflects. From this he draws a patient diagnosis of a very common struggle, the one he calls fighting against circumstances. A man revolts against an effect outside himself, while all the time he is nourishing and preserving its cause in his own heart. He wants better conditions while declining to become a different person, and so, in Allen's words, he remains bound, polishing the mirror while the face before it never changes. It is one of those sentences that can sting on first hearing and console ever after, because if the cause is in us, the remedy has been in reach all along. And so he arrives at the still center of the chapter. Circumstance does not make the man, it reveals him to himself. Hardship, on this view, does not install weakness in anyone, and ease does not install virtue. Each simply draws out what was already there and holds it up to be seen. This is a hard doctrine if it is used as a weapon, and here Allen is more careful than his popularizers, and we should be careful with him. He warns in the same pages that a person's whole soul condition cannot be judged by another from the outside of his life. An honest man may suffer in some directions, and a dishonest man may prosper in others. And the easy conclusions we draw from that, he says, are superficial, because each is reaping the mixed harvest of a mixed nature. The mirror is for the one who stands before it. It was never meant for measuring our neighbors. He is just as careful about what the mirror is actually measuring. The reflection to look for, in his account, is not wealth, because the measure of right thought is not possession, but blessedness, and the measure of wrong thought is not poverty, but wretchedness. A rich life can be a miserable one, he says, and a modest life a deeply blessed one, and the water reports only the misery or the blessedness, never the sums. That one clarification separates Allen from a century of his imitators, who read the mirror as a ledger. He read it as a face, nor can what stands before it be hidden. Men imagine, Allen observes, that thought can be kept secret, but it cannot. What a mind dwells on settles into habit, and habit hardens slowly and without ceremony into the visible shape of a life. Anxious, hesitant thinking becomes a hesitant manner, and the hesitant manner becomes narrowed days. Gentle and forgiving thinking becomes a gentle bearing, and the gentle bearing gathers protection and friendship around it like a climate. Nothing in this is punishment, any more than the reflection in the harbour is punishment. It is only continuity, the inner becoming outer at the mirror's unhurried pace. Alan has one more image for it, a lighter one. The world, he suggests, is like a kaleidoscope, and the shifting pictures it presents to us, hour by hour, are arrangements of our own shifting thought. Turn the mind and the colors move. It is a child's toy standing in for a law of life, and that is very like him, to hand us the largest claims in the smallest containers. And the practical teaching, when it comes, is as modest as ever. A man cannot directly choose his circumstances, but he can choose his thoughts, and so indirectly yet surely shape his circumstances, he writes. Nothing about seizing the day. The day for Alan cannot be seized, only grown, and the growing is done at the one small point where a person has any say at all, the next thought, and then the one after it. That is the entire program, and its size is its kindness. Nothing tonight is asked of you but the water's kind of work, which is no work, which is settling. So come back to the harbour, last of all. The wind has dropped, the boats have stopped knocking, and the water has gone still enough to hold every lamp in the town without trying to hold any of them. The water does not strain to reflect, and it cannot be argued into reflecting. It only has to settle, and the lights find it on their own. Let the water settle then. The lamps will still be burning in the morning, and the sea will still be below the outlook, and that is enough for one night. Chapter 4. The Body Obeys. Somewhere in the last few minutes, without waiting to be asked, your body has begun the quiet work of putting itself to bed. The breath has settled a little lower in the chest. The hands have loosened their hold on the day. No one gave an order, and none was needed, for the body listens all day long to the mind it serves, and by this hour of the night it has heard nearly everything the mind is going to say. In the last chapter, we followed Alan as he traced the way circumstance grows out of thought. The outer life arranging itself slowly and lawfully around the inner one, the way a coastline arranges the weather it receives. Tonight, the same law comes nearer. It steps in from the street, past the business and the acquaintances, past even the walls of the house, and rests its hand at last on the body itself. The third section of his little book concerns health, and it carries a single idea, which is this: the body is the servant of the mind, and like any old and faithful servant, it carries out a great many instructions that were never formally given. Alan states it as plainly as he states anything. The body is the servant of the mind, he begins, and then, in the sentence that follows, it obeys the operations of the mind, whether they be deliberately chosen or automatically expressed. It is worth resting a moment on that second phrase. Very little of what the mind says to the body is said deliberately. Most of it is murmured, hour after hour, in the low voice of habit. The habitual worry, the habitual grievance, the habitual gladness. A single anxious thought passes through the body like a breeze through a garden, and is gone by evening. But a climate of anxious thought, sustained across years, is another matter entirely. A climate is a thing a body has to live in, and the body, patient servant that it is, dresses for the weather it has learned to expect. Disease and health, Alan goes on, are like circumstances. They are rooted in thought. He does not advance this timidly. Sickly thoughts, he says, will express themselves through a sickly body, and thoughts of fear have been known to kill a man as speedily as a bullet. Those it does not kill quickly, he adds, fear goes on wearing down slowly, by the thousand, less visibly, but just as surely. And the people who live in dread of an illness, he observes, are so often the very people it finds. Anxiety demoralizes the whole body and leaves its doors unbarred, while thoughts of an impure kind, even when they never once become deeds, wear upon the nerves as heavily as any indulgence could. A century of medicine has taught us to hold such claims more carefully than Alan held them. And he wrote, "It is fair to say, with the untroubled confidence of his era." A channel that reads him closely owes its listeners that much plainness. But strip the claim down to what ordinary experience can verify, and something sturdy is still standing there. Everyone has felt fear arrive in the stomach before it arrived in words. Everyone has watched worry shorten the breath, set the jaw, sour the appetite, and quietly unpick a night of sleep. The road between thought and flesh is real, and the traffic on it runs in both directions all night long. Alan only asks that we notice which way most of it is running, and the law, as always with Alan, runs just as faithfully the other way. Strong, pure, and happy thoughts, he tells us, build the body up in vigor and grace. At the bidding of glad and beautiful thinking, the frame itself seems to grow younger. The body is a delicate instrument, plastic to thought, taking the print of whatever is pressed upon it steadily, the way soft wax takes a seal, and habits of thought leave their effects there, good or bad, the way seasons of weather leave their record in a garden wall. Then comes the image that gathers the whole section into one picture, and it is an image of water. Cleanness, Alan says, travels outward from the heart into the conduct and at last into the very flesh, and defilement travels outward by exactly the same road. A change of diet, he adds, will not help a man who will not change his thoughts. Though when the thinking is made clean, the appetites tend to follow of their own accord, and then he goes to the spring. Thought is the fount of action, life and manifestation. Make the fountain pure, and all will be pure. One source, one stream, one sea. What rises at the fountainhead decides everything downstream, and no amount of labor along the riverbank can sweeten water that is bittered at the spring. He can be quaint on this subject, and the quaintness deserves a smile rather than a frown. The saint who does not wash his body, he remarks, is not a saint, and the man who has strengthened and purified his thoughts, he assures us, need not trouble himself about the malevolent microbe. The microbes, we now know, keep their own counsel about such things. But beneath the old-fashioned confidence, the direction of his teaching holds steady, and taken gently, it is hard to argue with. Clean thoughts make for clean habits, and a life is swept from the inside outward. Alan liked to read this law in faces. A sour expression, he observes, is never an accident. It is worked into the features thought by thought, as lines are worked into leather, and the wrinkles that mark the face are drawn there by folly, by passion, and by pride. He tells of knowing a woman of 96 who had the bright, innocent face of a girl, and of a man still well under middle age, whose face was pulled into lines that did not agree with one another. The first face, he says, was written by a sweet and sunny disposition, the second by passion and discontent. On the faces of the aged, he writes, some wrinkles are made by sympathy, some by strong and pure thought, and some are carved by passion, and he asks who could fail to tell them apart. Where the life behind it has been rightly lived, age itself comes calm, peaceful, and softly mellowed, like the setting sun. His counsel, in the end, is not a regimen, but a redirection. The way to protect the body, he says, is to guard the mind, and the way to renew the body is to make the mind beautiful, for thoughts of malice, envy, and despondency rob the flesh of its health and grace, as surely as damp robs a house of its warmth. You cannot have a sweet and wholesome room, he reminds us, without opening it freely to air and sunshine, and a strong body and a bright, serene countenance come only of a mind that stands open, in the same way, to thoughts of joy and goodwill and serenity. If sleep is beginning to lean against these sentences, let it. Nothing tonight needs to be memorized, and the body, which has been listening all along, knows this lesson rather better than the mind does. Cheerful thought, Allen says, is the best physician the body will ever have, and goodwill the best comforter for grief and sorrow. To live shut up in ill will, in cynicism, in suspicion and envy, is to live in a prison of one's own building, while to think well of all, to be cheerful with all, to learn patiently to find the good in all, is to stand already at the doorway of heaven. The section ends with a sentence that might have been written for exactly this hour of the night. As Allen puts it, to dwell day by day in thoughts of peace toward every creature will bring abounding peace to their possessor. Peace toward every creature is a large instruction, but it includes, it is worth noticing, the creature presently lying in this bed. Let the body be at peace with the mind that has driven it all day, and the mind be at peace with the body that has carried it, for they have served each other faithfully since morning, and the night belongs to neither of them. Chapter 5. Thought joined to purpose. Picture a small boat on a wide sea, an hour or two after dark. There is nothing wrong with the boat. The hull is sound, the canvas is good, the night is mild. It is only that no hand rests on the tiller, and no port has been named, and so the boat goes wherever the water happens to be going, and the water, tonight, is not going anywhere in particular. That boat is Allen's own image. With the majority of us, he says, the little bark of thought is simply allowed to drift upon the ocean of life, and the fourth section of his book is his quiet objection to all that drifting. Its one idea sounds stern at first hearing and grows kinder the longer it is held. Thought, to come to anything, must be joined to a purpose, the way a boat, to come to anywhere, must be joined to a course. He puts the stern half first. Aimlessness is a vice, and such drifting must not continue for him who would steer clear of catastrophe and destruction. a vice. It is a strong word to hang upon so passive a fault, and he chooses it deliberately. We tend to reserve our alarm for the loud sins, the deliberate wrongs. Allen points instead at the quiet leak. They who have no central purpose in their lives, he writes, fall an easy prey to petty worries, to fears, to troubles and self-pityings. And all of these, he says, are marks of weakness which lead, just as surely as planned wrongdoing, though by a different route, to failure and unhappiness and loss. It is worth noticing what this makes of worry. Worry, in Allen's picture, is not a duty faithfully performed by responsible people. It is what thought does when it has nowhere to go. The mind without an aim does not fall still. It falls to pieces. It frets, it circles, it pities itself. And the cure he proposes is not a harder grip on each separate fret, but a center for the whole. Anxiety, seen this way, not the sign of too much purpose, but of too little. A wheel that sits loose upon its axle rattles all day. Set true upon its center, it turns from morning to night and makes almost no sound. So comes the counsel. A man should conceive of a legitimate purpose in his heart and set out to accomplish it. The purpose may be a spiritual ideal, Allen says, or it may be a worldly object, according to one's nature at the time, and he is quite unbothered by the difference, which is its own small mercy. What matters is that the purpose become the centralizing point of thought, the place where scattered thinking gathers, as a household gathers at a hearth in the evening. A man should make this purpose his supreme duty, he writes, and devote himself to its attainment, not letting his thoughts wander away into passing fancies and longings and imaginings. And this steadying of the gaze, he says, is the true road to self-control and to real concentration of thought. And here the chapter turns kind. Even if a man fails again and again to accomplish his purpose, Allen says, and fail he must until his weakness is overcome. The strength of character gained in the trying is the measure of his true success and becomes a new starting point for power in the future. Failure, in other words, is quietly demoted. It is no longer a verdict. It is one of the pathways, and those he calls the strong are simply the ones who have agreed to keep walking it without letting go of the aim. The gardener does not abandon the garden over one failed bed. The bed is turned again, and the seed goes in again, and the garden itself is never in doubt. Nor does the purpose need to be grand, and this may be the gentlest sentence in the section. Those who are not prepared for the apprehension of a great purpose should fix the thoughts upon the faultless performance of their duty, no matter how insignificant their task may appear. No calling is required, no vision on a mountaintop, nothing that needs to be announced to anyone at all. A floor swept entirely, a letter answered fully, a small task done with the whole of the attention. Only in this way, Allen says, can thought be gathered and focused and resolution developed. And once those exist, he adds, there is nothing that may not in time be accomplished. The great purpose, when it finally arrives, will find the instrument already tuned. He extends the same patience to the weak, among whom he counts, at one time or another, nearly everyone, The weakest soul, knowing its own weakness and believing that strength comes only by effort and practice, will begin at once to exert itself, he says, and, laying effort upon effort and patience upon patience, will never cease to grow, until at last it is strong beyond anything it once believed it had in it. As the physically frail can make themselves strong by careful and patient training, so, he writes, the man of weak thoughts can make them strong by exercising himself in right thinking. It is not a promise that the work is quick. It is a promise that the work works. Then the enemies are named. Having conceived his purpose, a man should mark out, mentally, a straight pathway to its achievement, looking neither to the right nor to the left. And doubts and fears, Allen says, must be rigorously shut out, for they are disintegrating elements which break the straight line of effort and render it crooked and useless. Thoughts of doubt and fear have never once accomplished a thing, he insists, and they never will. They lead always to failure. Purpose, energy, the power to do, all of it goes quiet when doubt and fear creep in, and the will to act, he says, rises out of the knowledge that we are able to act, which is why doubt, which eats away exactly that knowledge, is the enemy not merely of comfort, but of strength itself. He who has conquered doubt and fear has conquered failure. It is an enormous claim to fit inside 10 words, and Allen means it at full size. The man whose every thought is allied with power meets his difficulties bravely and wisely, and his purposes, planted in their season, bloom and bear fruit that does not fall too early to the ground. Thought joined without fear to purpose becomes, he says, a creative force. The one who knows this has ceased to be a loose bundle of moods and hesitations and has become the conscious wielder of his own mind. But notice, before the size of all that overwhelms, what is not being asked for. Not brilliance, not luck, not force of personality. Only that the thinking and the aim be joined, and that the joint be kept free of the two solvents that dissolve it. And if, somewhere in the last few minutes, the thread of this argument has slipped out of your hands, nothing whatever has been lost. Drifting is only a vice for the waking. Purpose belongs to the day side of life. Its whole gift to the night side is this, that a question truly decided stops asking itself, and a mind with a course set somewhere out ahead of it can let go of the tiller. After dark, the way a sailor does in harbour, wheel lashed, anchor down, sails furled, precisely because the destination is no longer in doubt. That is the landing place of the chapter. Aim is not agitation. Aim is the very thing agitation is missing. The boat we began with is still out on the dark water, but something has changed in the picture, because now there is a harbour it belongs to, and a course it will take up again in the morning. A boat at anchor still swings a little with the tide. It is meant to. It can swing and rest and still be exactly where it should be. Chapter 6. Achievement without anxiety. At this hour, in farm country everywhere, fields that were sown in the spring are doing their work in the dark. No one is out among them supervising. The farmer who worried at noon about the rain is asleep behind a darkened window, and the wheat holds nothing against him. It goes on turning soil and water into grain by laws that never once required his anxiety, only his labor. Keep that field in view, because the 5th section of Allen's book, the section on achievement, is really about it. His subject here is success and failure, which may be the noisiest and most anxious subject in the world, and the single idea he brings to it is the one that quiets the noise. Achievement is not seized, and it is not granted. It is grown. All that a man achieves, he writes, and all that he fails to achieve is the direct result of his own thoughts. In a justly ordered universe, where a loss of balance would mean total ruin, responsibility for oneself must be absolute. The harvest follows the sowing exactly, everywhere, always, and everything else in the chapter follows from that. Exactness sounds cold until one sees what it replaces. If results were handed out by favor, then the right posture toward life would be the courtier's, watchful, envious, ingratiating, anxious. If results were handed out by chance, the right posture would be the gambler's, which is only anxiety wearing a braver coat. But if results are grown from thought and effort by law, then anxiety has no office left to hold. A man's weakness and strength, his purity and impurity, are his own, says Allen, and not another man's. They are brought about by himself, and they can be altered only by himself. His condition is likewise his own. And there is nothing in that arrangement to resent, because it means the seed in the ground is safe from everything in the world except its sower. As he thinks, so he is. As he continues to think, so he remains. Notice the second half of that sentence, for it is the working half. The first half we have met all through this little book. The second is the reason that habits of thought, and not bursts of it, decide the shape of a life. One elevated evening changes very little. It is the thinking that is continued in, morning after ordinary morning, that hardens into character and then softens into circumstance. And this is also, Allen says, why no one can do the work on anyone else's behalf. A strong man cannot help a weaker unless the weaker is willing to be helped, and even then the weak man must grow strong of himself. The strength one admires in another can be developed, he writes, only by one's own effort. Even kindness here respects the law. From this he draws one of the strangest and calmest passages in the book. Men have always said, he notes, that many are slaves because one is an oppressor, and have hated the oppressor. Lately some reverse the judgment and despise the slaves. Allen declines both furies. Oppressor and slave, he says, are cooperators in ignorance, each afflicting themselves while seeming to afflict the other. A perfect love condemns neither, and a perfect compassion embraces both. Whatever one makes of that, as politics, as a portrait of the mind, it points at something true. Contempt and resentment both keep the thoughts fastened to the very thing one fears. And the man who has put away weakness and selfishness alike, Allen says, belongs to neither party. He is simply free. then the price is named, and this is the heart of the chapter. A man can only rise, conquer, and achieve, Allen says, by lifting up his thoughts, and he can only remain weak and miserable by refusing to lift them, and the lifting has a cost. There can be no progress, no achievement without sacrifice, and a man's worldly success will be in the measure that he sacrifices his confused animal thoughts. By confused animal thoughts, he means the whole warm fog of appetite, impulse, and drift, the mind that merely grazes. A man whose first thought is indulgence, he observes, can neither think clearly nor plan methodically. He cannot find and develop his own hidden resources. He is not yet ready, Allen says, to act for himself and stand on his own feet. He is limited, but only by the thoughts he chooses. Notice what the sacrifice is not. It is not suffering for its own sake, and it is not the flat renunciation of every pleasure. A man need not, Allen says quite plainly, give up all of his animality and selfishness in order to succeed, only a portion of it. And the portion asked for is precisely the part that was fogging the lens. This is sacrifice in the old sense of the word. Not a losing, but a trading, the lesser thing laid down for the greater. The sculptor gives up the marble he cuts away. The gardener gives up the weeds. No one calls either of them deprived, because the shape that emerges was the whole point. And the higher a man lifts his thoughts, Allen writes, the more upright and righteous he becomes, and the greater and more enduring his achievements will be. The universe, he insists, does not in the long run favor the greedy, the dishonest, or the vicious, however much the surface of a given year may seem to suggest it. It helps the honest, the magnanimous, the virtuous, and all the great teachers of the ages, he says, have declared some version of this. Intellectual achievement, he calls the result of thought consecrated to the search for knowledge and for what is beautiful and true. Spiritual achievement, the consummation of holy aspiration. And the man who dwells constantly on what is noble and pure, he promises, will grow wise and steady in character, and rise into influence and blessedness, as surely as the sun climbs to its height at noon and the moon comes to her full. That is the certainty to keep, the same quiet confidence the farmer extends to the field. There is one warning, and it is a gentle one. Victories won by right thought, Allen says, can be kept only by watchfulness, for many give way when success seems assured and fall rapidly back. The field does not stay cleared because it was cleared once, but even watchfulness, notice, is not worry. Watching is calm work, a lamp kept lit and trimmed rather than a bell rung all night. And all achievements, he writes, in business, in the intellect, in the spirit, obey one law and follow one method, differing only in what they aim at. There is one agriculture, and there are many crops. Then the section closes with the sentence that holds its whole economy, and it may be the most evenly balanced sentence Allen ever wrote. He who would accomplish little must sacrifice little. He who would achieve much must sacrifice much. He who would attain highly must sacrifice greatly. Read at noon, that is a ladder and a challenge. Read at this hour, it is something far better. It is the price list in a shop with no back rooms, and there is a deep restfulness in a shop like that. Nothing is rigged. Nothing depends on charm, or standing, or luck. The rate of exchange between what is laid down and what is taken up hangs plainly on the wall, and it reads the same for everyone who has ever walked in. Achievement of whatever kind is the crown of effort, the diadem of thought. A crown, notice, and not a prize. Prizes are awarded. Crowns, in Allen's sense, are grown into, the way the oak is the crown of the acorn and the harvest is the crown of the seed. By self-control, resolution, purity, and well-directed thought, he says, a man ascends, by their opposites he descends. And between those two slopes there is no third machinery anywhere, no committee to petition, no wheel of fortune to placate. What a man is building in the only durable sense is himself. The rest is delivery. You are welcome to let all of this blur together now. The law it describes goes on working whether or not anyone stays awake to watch it, and that, in the end, is the entire comfort of the chapter. Anxiety belongs to the belief that outcomes must be watched into being. Allen's teaching here is that they are grown into being, out of the ordinary soil of daily thought, while our attention is elsewhere, even while it is nowhere at all. The field does not need the farmer's worry tonight. It never did. It needs only what it has already had, the sowing and the tending, and it will render back exactly what was given, measure for measure, by the slow arithmetic of seasons that has never once hurried and never once been wrong. So the day's efforts can be left exactly where they lie, finished or unfinished. They are seeds in the ground now, and the ground keeps honest books. Sleep, in a well-ordered life, is not the interruption of achievement, but one of its instruments, the nightly practice of laying things down. And it is working even now, quietly, in the dark. Chapter 7. Visions and Ideals. Every bridge in the world was crossed in somebody's mind years before it was crossed on foot. Every garden was walked in before it was planted. Every house was lived in before its first stone left the quarry, and every piece of quiet music was heard by one person alone, long before there was anything for the rest of us to hear. The built world, looked at steadily, is the visible shore of an invisible sea. Allen would have us look at it steadily. The 6th section of his little book is called Visions and Ideals, and it opens with as large a claim as he ever allows himself. The dreamers are the saviors of the world. As the visible world is sustained by the invisible, so men, through all their trials and sins and sordid vocations, are nourished by the beautiful visions of their solitary dreamers. Humanity, he goes on, cannot forget its dreamers, and cannot let their ideals fade and die. It lives in them, and carries them as the realities it will one day see with its own eyes. The composer, the sculptor, the painter, the poet, the prophet, the sage. These, Allen says, are the ones who draft the world to come. The world is beautiful because they have lived, and without them, he adds flatly, laboring humanity would perish. Then he offers his witnesses. Columbus, he says, cherished the vision of another world and discovered it. Copernicus, the vision of a wider universe of many worlds, and revealed it. Buddha, the vision of a spiritual world of stainless beauty and perfect peace, and he entered into it. In each case the vision came first, held privately, for years, against all the visible evidence, and in each case the visible evidence eventually gave way. And so the instruction at the center of the chapter is an instruction about tending, spoken like a gardener. Cherish your visions, cherish your ideals, cherish the music that stirs in your heart, the beauty that forms in your mind, the loveliness that drapes your purest thoughts. For out of them, he promises, all delightful conditions will in time grow. And of these, if we remain true to them, our world will at last be built. To desire, he says, is to obtain. To aspire is to achieve. And he asks whether it could really be the arrangement of things that the basest desires are gratified in full measure, while the purest aspirations starve for want of feeding. Such, he answers, is not the law. For proof he reaches into the ordinary mercies of nature, and the images he chooses are, every one of them, images of sleep. The greatest achievement, he says, was at first and for a time only a dream. The oak, he reminds us, sleeps inside the acorn, and the bird waits inside the egg, and in the soul's highest vision, a waking angel stirs. A dream, he says, is the seedling of a coming reality. Notice how restful these figures are. The acorn does not strain toward the oak. The egg does not worry itself open. What each of them does, through the long dark of winter and the long dark of the shell, is hold its shape and wait. And that, Allen suggests, is most of what cherishing a vision means. Then he gives the promise itself, in 2 sentences that generations of readers have carried with them. Dream lofty dreams, and as you dream, so shall you become. Your vision is the promise of what you shall one day be. Your ideal is the prophecy of what you shall at last unveil. A promise and a prophecy, both of them words about time. A vision, in Allen's understanding, is not a report on the present and not an ornament for it. It is a letter arriving early from something real that is still on its way. Circumstances may be uncongenial, he freely allows, but they will not long remain so once an ideal is perceived and steadily reached toward. For no one, he says, can travel inward and stand still on the outside. And then Allen does something he almost never does anywhere in his books. He tells a story. Here is a youth, he says, hard pressed by poverty and long labor, shut up for hours in an unhealthy workshop, unschooled, lacking every art of refinement. But he dreams of better things, of intelligence, of refinement, of grace and beauty. He builds in his mind an ideal condition of life. The vision of a wider liberty and a larger scope takes hold of him. Unrest, urges him to action, and he spends every spare hour and every small coin of his means on drawing out his hidden powers. Very soon, Alan says, his mind has so altered that the workshop can no longer hold him. It has fallen so far out of harmony with the person he is becoming that it drops away from his life the way an outgrown coat is set aside. And with opportunities rising to meet his expanding powers, he passes out of it forever. Years later, we meet this youth grown, and he is master now of certain forces of the mind, wielding an influence that reaches across the world. Men and women hang upon his words and remold their characters by them, and he has become a steady, shining center that other lives arrange themselves around, the way planets arrange themselves around a sun. He has realized, Alan says, the vision of his youth. He has become one with his ideal. And lest the story sound too rare to borrow, Alan quotes a writer he admired, who imagined a clerk walking out at last through the door that had so long seemed the barrier of his ideals, the pen still behind his ear and the ink still on his fingers, to find an audience waiting, and a shepherd boy wandering into the studio of a master, and staying, and in time being told there was nothing more to teach him. Against all this stands the language of luck, and Alan is patient with it, and firm. The thoughtless, he says, seeing only the results of things and never the long process inside them, talk of fortune and of chance. They see a man grow rich and call him lucky. They see another grow learned and call him favored. They watch a third become wise and gracious, and say that chance has helped him at every turn. What they do not see, he says, are the trials and the failures, the sacrifices made and the efforts kept up in the dark, the heartaches endured so that the apparently insurmountable could be overcome. They see the light and the joy and call it luck. They see the goal finally reached and call it good fortune. They see the finished result, and, not understanding the process, they call it chance. But in all human affairs, he writes, there are efforts and there are results, and the one is always the measure of the other. Chance, in his account, simply has no hands to give anything away. The section closes with the sentence the whole book has been climbing toward, and it is best heard slowly. The vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, Alan writes, this you will build your life by, this you will become. Glorify, enthrone. The verbs are worth one unhurried breath each. They are not verbs of effort, but verbs of honor, the language of what a person keeps highest. And his claim is that the life, obedient as the body was in an earlier chapter, gradually builds itself around whatever is kept there. Which makes this a fitting chapter to fall asleep on. And there is no need to resist doing exactly that. On the border where thinking loosens into dreaming, half-formed pictures of better things will sometimes drift past, and nothing needs to be done about them tonight. What is cherished keeps, the way the acorn keeps the oak all winter without once thinking of it. The dreamers, after all, are the saviors of the world, and for the next few hours you will be one of them. What such dreaming asks of the dreamer is only a quiet place to happen in, and quietness itself, the deep settled calm that Alan kept for the very end of his little book, is where this essay will go when it continues. For now, the lamp can burn low. The visions are planted, the ground is honest, and the night is long enough. Chapter 8. Serenity. There is a way the sea behaves at the end of a long day of weather. All afternoon the wind has hauled the water up into whitecaps and hurry, and now, toward evening, the wind has gone elsewhere, and the surface begins to settle. By slow degrees, into a smoothness that still remembers, in its long swells, everything the day has done to it. Nothing about that settling is sudden, and nothing about it is forced. Calm, at sea and in the mind, is not an interruption of the storm so much as the storm's long subsiding. It is what water does when nothing is troubling it any longer. As a man thinketh ends on this water. After the garden and the mirror, after the body that obeys and the thought joined to purpose, after the visions and the ideals, the little book closes with a short final section called Serenity, and everything that came before turns out to have been walking toward it. The order of the book is itself a lesson. First the seeing, then the working, and only at the very end the stillness. It is worth noticing what the ending is not. A book about the power of thought could have ended with achievement, with the workshop youth grown into his worldwide influence. It could have ended with the vision glorified and the ideal enthroned. Instead, it ends in quietness, as though Alan wished to say that the final evidence of right thinking is not anything a man builds or wins, but the peace with which he comes at last to stand inside his own life. He is careful, before the section is more than a breath old, to say where such peace comes from. The words he chooses are these: calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. It is the result of long and patient effort in self-control. It is a jewel, and it is a result, and the pairing matters. Calmness is not a gift of temperament, not the luck of an easy nature or a mild climate of the blood. It is formed the way jewels are formed, slowly, under pressure, out of ordinary material. Its presence in a person is evidence of history, the way rings in a tree are evidence of years. Behind every truly calm face, there has been an apprenticeship that nobody saw, a long private schooling in the laws and operations of thought. And this is why the calm of a wise person feels so different from mere placidity, and why it cannot be counterfeited by holding still. The apprenticeship, as Alan describes it, is mostly a matter of understanding. A man becomes calm, he says, in the measure that he understands himself as a being shaped and evolved by thought. Because whoever has traced cause and effect through his own inner weather can no longer be wholly surprised by anyone else's. As that understanding ripens, and the internal relations of things grow plainer, the fussing and the fuming begin to die down of their own accord. The worrying and the grieving loosen their hold, and what remains behind them is poise, the steady balance of a mind that knows how it works. Nothing has been suppressed, and nothing has been lost. There is simply less and less inside the calm man for a storm to take hold of. The calm Alan means is not the calm of distance or indifference. It is the calm of comprehension, the settled weather of a mind that has watched its own causes long enough to trust its own sky. And a calm that begins as the most private of achievements turns out, almost at once, to be a public gift. The calm man, having learned how to govern himself, knows how to meet other people, and other people feel it immediately. They sense that they can learn from him and lean upon him, and the room he enters grows a little steadier because he is in it. Alan reaches for the most restful images in his cupboard to describe him. The strong, calm man, he writes, is like a shade-giving tree in a thirsty land or a sheltering rock in a storm. It is worth noticing what those two images have in common. The tree does not go looking for the weary, and the rock does not argue with the rain. They shelter by standing still, and their stillness is the whole of the service. Anyone who has known such a person, a grandmother, an old teacher, a friend whose voice never rises, will remember that their simple presence in a house was itself a kind of shelter. Alan is even practical about it, in his mild way. The ordinary trader, he observes, will find his business improve as he grows more equable, because people will always prefer to deal with someone whose manner does not pitch and roll. And the more tranquil a man becomes, the further his quiet influence travels, and the more good it is able to do. The closing pages ask, in effect, whether anyone has ever failed to love a tranquil heart. A life kept sweet and balanced, whether it rains or shines. And the question needs no answer, because everyone has stood near such a life at some time and felt the shade of it fall across them. Against this, the book sets the commoner picture and sets it down with something like sorrow. How many people, it mourns, sour their own lives with explosive tempers, ruining whatever is sweet and beautiful in them, pulling down in a few hot minutes a poise that took years to build. Most of humanity, as Alan saw it, lives at the mercy of its own weather, swept by passion it has never governed, grieving without shore, pushed here and there by every gust of anxiety and doubt. And only the person whose thoughts have been brought under control and made pure learns in the end to make the winds and the storms of the soul obey. Then comes the sentence on which the whole section turns. That exquisite poise of character, which we call serenity, is the last lesson of culture, the fruitage of the soul. It is the last lesson, and not the first, and there is mercy in the ordering. Serenity is not the entrance to this school. It is what a person carries out of the door at the end, and nobody should be disheartened to find it still unfinished in himself, since by its nature it ripens late. It is the fruitage, and fruit is the garden's slowest work. No gardener ever ripened an apple by worrying at it. The same pages weigh serenity against money and find the money light, for mere money-seeking looks small beside a serene life. A life sunk so deep in what is true that the waves pass over it and the tempests never reach it. On the surface of the sea there is always weather. A little way down there is none at all, only the great slow body of the water, dark and still. The serene life, Alan says, is lived at that depth. and then the book turns to its reader for the last time, and the farewell is as tender as anything Allen ever wrote. He speaks directly to the tempest-tossed soul, wherever it may be, under whatever conditions it may live. And he promises that out in the ocean of life, the isles of blessedness are smiling, and that the sunny shore of its ideal awaits its coming. He asks only that the hand stay firm upon the helm of thought, and he says that in the little boat of the soul, the commanding master is not absent but asleep and may be wakened. Then he closes the most famous of his books with words that readers have now been carrying for more than a century. Self-control is strength, right thought is mastery, calmness is power. Say unto your heart, peace, be still. If those words are all this hour leaves with you, they are enough, and even they are not required. This is a place in the evening where you are allowed to stop following the argument altogether, to let the voice become weather, and to drift, because the chapter will end the same way whether you attend to it or not. The sea settles by slow degrees. The last of the wind goes somewhere else. And the final lesson of the little book is kindly, the one that asks nothing more of you tonight. Not strength, not mastery, only calmness, which at this hour is simply another name for rest. Chapter 9. Out from the Heart. Somewhere under the shoulder of a hill there is a spring. Nobody sees it. It works in the dark, below the bracken and the stone, and what everyone sees instead is the stream it feeds, running bright over the gravel at the bottom of the valley. Everything the stream is, it owes to that hidden water. If the spring runs clear, the stream runs clear. If the spring is troubled, no amount of tending the banks farther down will ever mend the water. Anyone who truly wants to change the stream must go uphill and inward to the source. That, in one image, is the teaching of another of Allen's small books, the one that gives this chapter its name. It is called Out from the Heart. It is a book of much the same small size as a Man Thinketh, and it opens with 3 sentences as compact as anything he ever wrote. As the heart, so is the life. The within is ceaselessly becoming the without. Nothing remains unrevealed. Everything else in the book is a patient widening of those words. And everything in this hour so far has been leaning toward them, because here the philosophy of thought becomes, at last, a philosophy of the heart, of the hidden place where thinking begins. It is worth lying still for a moment with the last of those sentences, the one that says nothing remains unrevealed. Whatever is hidden, Allen tells us, is hidden only for a time. It ripens, and it comes forth. First the seed, then the tree, then the blossom, then the fruit. The universe, as he saw it, keeps that fourfold order everywhere, and hearts are not exempt from it. What a person harbors, he will eventually hand over to the world in the shape of words, actions, and things accomplished. Thought blossoms into deed, and deeds ripen slowly into character and destiny. There is something bracing in this, because it means that no secret is ever quite safe inside us. And there is something consoling in it too, because it means that no quiet goodness is ever wasted, since that also must ripen, and that also must come forth. The heart, in other words, is not a vault, but a seed bed, and time is on the side of whatever is planted there. Allen's figure for all this is the one the hillside has already given us. He writes, "As the fountain from the hidden spring, so issues man's life from the secret recesses of his heart." All that a man is and does is generated there, he goes on, and all that he will ever be and do must take its rise there. A fountain in the square of an old town makes the same point. The basin and the bright column of water are public. Children trail their hands in it. Travelers drink from it. The whole town knows its sound. But the spring that feeds it is private, buried somewhere in the hills behind the houses, and the two are one water. Nothing appears in the basin that did not first make the long journey in the dark from the source. As the spring, so the fountain. As the heart, so the day. Our words and our acts are simply the heart, arrived above ground. And Allen presses the point further than comfort would like to follow. Gladness and sorrow, hope and fear, love and hatred. These, he says, live nowhere but in the heart. They are conditions of mind and nothing else, and the world supplies their occasions but not their substance. Temptation, he insists, does not arise in the outer object, but in the mind that desires the object. Sorrow does not live in the things and happenings of life, but in an undisciplined attitude toward those things and happenings. The same rain falls all night on two houses, and in one it is heard as ruin, and in the other it is the best of all sounds to sleep under, and the rain itself has no opinion. Allen does not deny that the world is real, or that its storms are wet. He denies only that the world can reach into the spring and decide what the water shall be. If that is true, then the great work of a life is not the endless rearranging of circumstances after all, but the slow purifying of the spring from which every circumstance takes its colour. This is also the book in which Allen gives his oldest metaphor its fullest form. Mind is the infallible weaver of destiny. Thought is the thread. Good and evil deeds are the warp and woof, and the web, woven upon the loom of life, is character. Readers of As a Man Thinketh will remember the weaver from its foreword, where the mind weaves both the character within and the circumstance without. Here the whole loom is set out plainly, and the figure repays a moment of drowsy attention. A single thread seems to commit the cloth to nothing, and in a sense that is so, but the weaver never stops weaving, and the pattern, in the end, is nothing more than the threads it is made of. What the mind wears, the mind wove, and no other hands have ever touched the loom. Yet the same chapter is one long argument for freedom. A man, Allen says, is not arbitrarily bound at any point. He has bound himself at many points, and what he has bound, he can, whenever he chooses, begin to unbind. By recurring practice, he formed his habits, and by renewed effort, he can break them off. His possibilities are limitless, and his freedom, at bottom, is complete. Life, in Allen's view, always builds from the inside outward, and only decay works from the outside in. And so the person who stops striving against other people and turns that strength instead to the transformation of his own mind is not retreating from the battle, but going quietly to the only place where it was ever really being fought. He wastes nothing now. He mends the water at the spring. But the sentence in this little book that most belongs to the night is the one about watching. Man is the keeper of his heart, the watcher of his mind, the solitary sentinel of his citadel of life. A sentinel's work is quiet work. He does not fight the war, and on most nights nothing happens at all. He stands where he can see the gate, keeps his small lamp trimmed, and notices what comes up the road. That, Allen says, is the whole office of a human being with respect to his own heart. To watch the gateway, and to notice what asks to come in. The keeper can be diligent or negligent. He can guard the heart carefully against unworthy thoughts, or he can live loosely and carelessly and let whatever wanders up the road wander in. And the first way, Allen promises, leads out into enlightenment and blessedness, while the second leads only around and around through self-made suffering. It is worth noticing, at the edge of sleep, how merciful this doctrine finally is. Nothing in it requires anyone to police the whole world, to hold back the sea, or to manage the weather in other people's hearts. There is one gate to keep, and it is ours, and it is small, and even the keeping is less a battle than a kind of quiet housekeeping, done at walking pace, over the length of a life. Allen goes so far as to promise that the man who keeps that gateway with unwearying diligence cannot, in the end, miss liberation and peace. The watchman does not have to win anything. He has only to stay gently at his post, and the law does the rest. So the chapter can set you down where it found you, beside the hill. Far below, the stream goes on telling, faithfully, in the dark, whatever the spring is doing under the ground. And that is all the outer life of anyone has ever been. The inner life arrived into daylight, the within becoming, hour by hour, the without. Tonight nothing at all is asked of the watcher at the gate. The road is empty, the citadel is quiet, the lamp is lit, and the water under the hill of the heart runs on, clear and slow, toward morning. Chapter 10. The Unmaking of Habit. When a child is learning to write, Allen reminds us, it is the wrong grip that comes easily. The small hand curls around the pen in the comfortable way. The letters wander off the line, and the proper grip is at first painfully difficult. Then a year of practice goes by. The hand runs along the line without a single thought, and it is the wrong way that has become difficult and altogether unnecessary. Nothing in the child's nature changed. What changed was habit, and habit, in Allen's philosophy, is very nearly the whole visible architecture of a life. Out from the Heart gives a chapter of its own to this, and it may be the most hopeful chapter he ever wrote, though it begins by sounding stern. Every established state of mind, Allen teaches, is an acquired habit. Despondency and cheerfulness are habits. Anger and calmness are habits. Covetousness and generosity are habits. built up by repeated choice until they run by themselves. As he puts it, a thought constantly repeated, at last, becomes a fixed habit of the mind, and from such habits proceeds the life. We think we are describing our nature when we call ourselves anxious people, or say that we simply have a temper. Alan would answer that we are describing our practice, the thing we have rehearsed through 10,000 evenings until we mistook fluency for fate. The hope is hidden inside the sternness, because whatever was built by repetition can be unbuilt by repetition. It is commonly said that wrongdoing is easy and right-doing hard, and Alan concedes the observation while refusing it as an eternal truth. It is true, he says, only as bad handwriting is true of a child who has not yet learned, a passing ignorance and not a law of the world. The thief finds it very difficult to refrain from stealing because he has lived so long in covetous thoughts. The honest man feels no difficulty at all because the idea of theft never visits him. Anger and impatience come naturally to thousands of people only because they are rehearsed daily, and calmness and patience become habitual by the same road, by taking hold of a calm thought, with effort at first, and thinking it and living in it until use has become second nature, and anger has nowhere left to live. Alan is exact about the method, and the method is gradual. Emancipation, he says, is a steady growth from within, and never a sudden acquisition from without. The mind must be trained hourly and daily, the way a patient sculptor works his marble, shaping the crude material by many small strokes toward the figure of his best dreams. And the work must begin at the bottom. The schoolmaster does not open with the deep principles of mathematics. He sets a simple sum, and only years later unfolds the theory underneath. The apprentice is not lectured on the science of mechanics. A simple tool is put into his hand, and he learns by using it. Practice in Alan's school always comes before knowledge, in spiritual things exactly as in the trades. Virtue is learned the way carpentry is learned, and nobody planes a straight edge on the first morning. So the book does an unusual thing for a book of philosophy. It sets lessons, 10 small steps, gathered into 3 lessons, and they read less like commandments than like the first pages of an apprenticeship. The first lesson Alan calls the discipline of the body, and it takes aim at the 2 faults he thought the easiest to reach. One is indolence, by which he means giving the body more ease and more sleep than it truly requires, and putting off what ought to be done now. Its remedy is early rising, and the prompt, vigorous doing of every task as it comes, however small. The other is self-indulgence, eating for pleasure alone, more and richer food than the body asks for. Its remedy is simplicity, regular hours at the table, contentment with plain fare. When the body is well controlled and firmly guided, Alan says, and the craving for rich things has gone quiet, the first lesson is learned, and something lasting has been laid down in the heart, the foundation of a poised and self-governed life. The second lesson is the discipline of speech, and Alan walks through 5 faults of the tongue, from the cruelest to the subtlest. Slander goes first, the inventing or repeating of evil reports, the magnifying of the faults of people who are not in the room. The person who would live rightly learns to check the cruel word before it leaves the lips, and then the insincere thought that produced it. And Alan's whole rule is one sentence long. He will not say of another that which he dare not say to him. After slander comes gossip and idle talk, conversation about other people's private affairs, words spent to pass the time. The remedy is to speak with a purpose or to be quiet. Then comes abusive and unkind speech, the hurling of hard words and names, which Alan calls a deep sinking into folly. Whoever is inclined to accuse others is told instead to restrain his tongue and look in upon himself. Then comes levity, the empty laugh bought at the expense of absent friends, the joke that spends the sanctity of life for a moment of ridicule. Against it, Alan asks for pure mirth and a voice grown subdued and musical. Last and quietest comes captiousness, the habit of fault-finding, the harping on small flaws and the catching at other people's words in order to contradict them. The fault-finder is always watching other people's sentences. The wise man, Alan says, watches his own to soften and purify them, and so preserves his peace. Only then comes the third lesson, the discipline of inclination, where the work turns fully inward, and 3 virtues are to be practiced rather than faults overcome. The first is the unselfish performance of duty, for duty, Alan says, is only irksome to the person craving to escape it. Done without thought of self, done faithfully and with love, it ceases to be a burden and becomes a quiet joy. The second is unswerving rectitude, honesty carried into the smallest detail, no deception however trivial, no exaggeration, statements exact, nothing added to the truth and nothing taken away. And the third is unlimited forgiveness, the putting away of spite, retaliation and revenge, which Alan thought too small and foolish to be worth harbouring at all. The strongly virtuous man, he says, feels no personal injury and keeps no enemies, and if others insist on making themselves his enemies, he regards them kindly, understanding their ignorance and making full allowance for it. And here is the quiet secret of the whole curriculum. The reason this chapter is called the unmaking of habit rather than the breaking of it. Nothing in these lessons is merely given up. While a man is overcoming indolence, Alan points out, he is in the same motion acquiring energy, punctuality, and self-denial. While he is quieting the faults of his tongue, he is growing truthfulness, reverence, kindliness, and self-control. The ceasing from evil is inseparably connected with the practice of good. Every old habit is unmade only by the making of a new one in its place. The way a path across a field disappears only when another path is walked into being. He does not pretend this is effortless. Truth keeps no lazy road. The mountain is climbed by climbing, and the apprentice gives 7 years to an ordinary craft without complaint. But discipline, he insists, is beautiful even while it is hard, and the end of it is sweet. And yet, buried in the sternest part of the first lesson, there is one instruction that every listener tonight is already keeping perfectly. Alan, who wants us up early and working promptly, is just as firm about the other end of the day. A man should go to bed to sleep, not to think. He should get up to think and work, not to sleep. The mornings in his school belong to effort. The nights belong to exactly what you are doing now. So if these lessons have begun to blur and slide, if the 5 faults of the tongue are already dissolving into the plain sound of a voice, you are not failing the discipline, you are keeping its gentlest rule. The day's unfinished arguments can be left where they lie, because drifting now is not indolence, it is obedience. For the mornings, Alan offers a patience as long as a life. If a man fails 10 times, he is not to be disheartened. If he fails 100 times, he is to rise and continue. If 1,000, he is still not to despair, because once the right path is entered, success is certain so long as the path is not abandoned. And the little book closes its teaching in 3 balanced breaths, a good order for any night. First strife and then victory, first labor and then rest, first weakness and then strength. The strife and the labor belong to the day that is over now, and to other days, which will manage without us until morning. What remains at this hour is the middle promise, the one the whole discipline was always working toward, and it is already softly coming true. Chapter 11. The Power of Meditation. Before first light in the last dark hour, a house is at its quietest. The fire is low, the road outside is empty, and the stars have not yet given way to morning. Teachers in every tradition have claimed this hour for the spirit, and it is here, in the stillness before the world wakes, that the third and gentlest of James Allen's little books opens its door. The book is called The Way of Peace, and it begins not with an argument, but with a practice. Everything we have listened to so far tonight has been leading toward this place. If thought shapes character, as the little book on thinking taught us, and if the heart is the hidden spring from which the life flows, as the second book taught us, then the deliberate care of thought is the most practical work a human being can undertake, and the name Allen gives to that work is meditation. He means nothing exotic by the word. There is no apparatus in it, no special posture, no secret vocabulary. Meditation, he writes, is the intense dwelling in thought upon an idea or theme with the object of thoroughly comprehending it. It is attention gathered up and given a single direction, the way scattered coals are raked together on a hearth until they give one steady heat. What makes this ordinary act so powerful is a law we have met before in his pages, the law that the mind grows into the likeness of whatever it lives with. Whatever a person constantly meditates upon, Allen says, they will not only come to understand, they will grow into it little by little, until it is woven into their very being. Dwell always on what is small and bitter, and the life turns small and bitter. Dwell on what is generous and calm, and generosity and calm slowly stop being visitors and become residents of the house. Thought, held long enough, sets like plaster. And that is why Allen is so careful about the object of meditation, why he asks that it be placed above us and not below, so that every return to it in thought lifts the thinker a little instead of lowering him. A person climbing keeps their eyes on the next rung, not on the one they are standing on. The image of climbing is Alan's own. Spiritual meditation, he says, is the pathway to the divine. It is the mystic ladder which reaches from earth to heaven, from error to truth, from pain to peace. Every saint has climbed it, he tells us, and every weary pilgrim who turns homeward must sooner or later set foot upon it. It is worth noticing what a humble machine a ladder is. It asks for no talent and no genius, only weight placed on one rung at a time, and it will bear anyone who climbs. That is the quiet promise underneath this whole opening chapter, that the highest things are reached by the plainest means. One held thought after another, one morning after another, the way any stair in the world is climbed by ordinary feet. Alan is careful, though, to say what meditation is not, and the distinction matters to him. At the outset, meditation must be distinguished from idle reverie. There is nothing dreamy and unpractical about it. Meditation, as he teaches it, is searching and honest thought that is willing to question its own motives, to set the day's conduct beside the heart's ideal, and look at both without flinching, and to take down, one by one, the comfortable errors a person has built around themselves like a wall. Reverie drifts wherever the current carries it. Meditation holds a heading, the way a small boat holds its bow to the swell. And it should be said plainly that this discipline is morning work, his work, not yours tonight. You who are listening are under no instruction at all. If these sentences begin to soften and run together, if the boat of your attention slips its mooring and swings with the tide, let it swing. The practice belongs to tomorrow. The rest belongs to tonight. For those who take up the practice, his advice is homely and exact. Choose some portion of the day, he says, and keep that period sacred to your purpose. The best hour, he thinks, is the very early morning, when the spirit of repose still lies on everything, when the excitements and worries of yesterday have died away and the mind is rested, strong, and willing to be taught. Tradition says Alan kept such an hour himself, walking up before the day began to a stone outlook above the sea and sitting quietly there before he wrote a word. And whether or not every detail of that story is true, the book's read as though it were. But he does not turn the morning into a rule to break people on. If the early hours are owed to your work, he says, then give an hour at night. If even that is taken from you, meditate in the small, unclaimed intervals of the day, the minutes that would otherwise scatter like dropped coins. And if your hands are set to a task that no longer needs the whole of your mind, you may meditate while they work. He remembers Jacob Boehme, the Christian mystic who came to his deep knowledge of divine things through long hours at a shoemaker's bench. In every life there is time to think, Alan writes, and the busiest, the most laborious, is not shut out from aspiration and meditation. The door, in other words, is never locked from the outside. What happens inside the daily hour is less like ecstasy and more like housekeeping. The meditating mind turns its attention upon itself, gently and without drama, and begins to notice what it has been keeping. A man given to anger, Allen suggests, will dwell in thought upon gentleness and forgiveness until his own harshness becomes plain to him. And then, little by little, the higher habit overgrows the lower, the way grass closes over a worn path once people stop walking it. Each error seen, and released lets in a little more light. And the strength gathered in that quiet hour does not stay in the quiet hour. It is stored the way a well stores rain, and it is drawn upon later in the loud parts of the day, in the hour of strife or sorrow or temptation, when a person reaches inward and finds, sometimes to their own surprise, that something steady has been built there. Allen also folds prayer into this teaching, in a passage that has comforted some readers and searched others. Meditation upon divine things, he says, is the very essence and soul of prayer, and petition without it is a body without a soul. A person who prays each day for patience while rehearsing grievances every waking hour is rowing against their own oars, asking for one thing while living out another. The prayer is not wrong, it is simply outvoted. The remedy is not louder asking but quieter living, thought and act brought gradually into line with the thing prayed for, until the person grows into what they once merely requested. Whatever a listener makes of the theology, the observation beneath it is plain and kind. We become our practice and not our wishes. And the end of the practice, Allen says, is neither cleverness nor visions, but the knowledge of eternal principles and the power that comes of resting upon them. The meditative life slowly exchanges desires, which are weather, for principles, which are climate. A mind anchored there is not easily capsized, because it has found something in itself that does not change with circumstance, and it has begun to live from that place. Change and loss start to loosen their grip. He pictures the soul opening the way a flower opens its petals to the morning light, not by force, not by argument, only by turning, day after day, toward what warms it. That is the first lesson of the way of peace, and it folds up very small. What the mind dwells on, the life becomes. Therefore dwell a little while each day on the highest thing you know. None of it needs doing tonight. The hour will still be there in the morning, as it was there for the shoemaker at his bench, and, so the story goes, for a quiet man on a hill above the sea. For now it is enough to let the day's thoughts settle like sand in still water, slowly, all the way down, until the water stands clear and dark and perfectly at rest. Chapter 12. The Two Masters. At the center of the second chapter of The Way of Peace, there is an old picture, and it is a picture of contested ground. Upon the battlefield of the human soul, Allen says, two masters are contending for the crown, for the kingship and dominion of the heart. He does not mean noise and banners, and there is nothing in the picture to alarm anyone. The contest he describes is the quietest in the world. It is decided not once in some famous hour, but daily, in choices small enough to pass unnoticed by everyone except the one who makes them. And it is going on tonight, everywhere, as peacefully as weather. He gives the two masters names. The first he calls self, the rebellious one, and he borrows for it an old title, the prince of this world. Its weapons are passion, pride, avarice, vanity, and self-will. The second he calls truth, the meek and lowly one, and its weapons are gentleness, patience, purity, sacrifice, humility, and love. Notice the strangeness of that second arsenal. One army in this war carries implements of darkness. The other refuses, on principle, to fight in the ordinary way at all, and wins, when it wins, by an entirely different kind of strength, the way water wins against stone, without ever once striking a blow. And between these two, Allen insists, there is finally no middle ground. As a soldier cannot serve at once in two opposing armies, he says, so every heart is enlisted in the ranks of self or in the ranks of truth. Here he sets side by side, as he loved to do, the two teachers he quoted most often. From the Buddha he takes the saying, there is self and there is truth. Where self is, truth is not. Where truth is, self is not. And beside it he places the words of Jesus, that no man can serve two masters, for he will hold to the one and despise the other. Two traditions, an ocean of history apart, and on this one point, Allen observes, they speak with a single voice. It is worth pausing over what he means by self, because he does not mean personality or humor or the ordinary sense of being someone in particular. He means the grasping part. He means the bundle of appetites and grievances and cherished opinions that must always be fed, always be defended, always be proved right. And truth, in his vocabulary, is not a doctrine either. It is the way things actually are, the moral order of the world, the reality he elsewhere simply calls divine. The difference between their natures explains the difficulty of the choice. Truth is simple, he says, absolutely undeviating and uncompromising, admitting of no bargains. Self is ingenious and crooked, endlessly qualifying, forever proposing little arrangements by which a person might keep every desire and still somehow collect the prize. The whole chapter is a patient refusal of those arrangements. Against them, Allen writes one of the starkest passages in any of his books. Self is the denial of truth. Truth is the denial of self. As you let self die, you will be reborn in truth. As you cling to self, truth will be hidden from you. Stark, but not cruel. He is describing geometry, not punishment, the way a room is either shuttered or lit. The light of day, he says, is hidden only from the blind, and the light of truth only from those who are blinded by self. Nothing needs to be added to the daylight for it to fill a room. Something only needs to be opened. How is a person to know which master holds their service? Allen offers a test, and it is a quiet inventory, the kind that might be taken at night, and it asks nothing at all about belief. Does the heart harbor suspicion, envy, and pride, or does it quietly resist them when they come? Is it self-willed and grasping, bent always upon its own ends, or is it gentle and ready now and then to give way? Does it need the last word, or can it let the last word go? A man may profess the loftiest religion, Allen says, and be chained all day to self. Another may profess no religion at all, and be dwelling hour by hour with the Most High. The label on the door tells us nothing about who lives in the house. What tells is charity. He who has most of charity has most of truth. From there, Allen turns to a subject he knew well from the religious quarrels of his own day: the strange heat with which people defend their opinions. Men engage in bitter controversy, he observes, and imagine all the while that they are defending truth, when what they are really defending is their own small stake in the argument, their portion of being right. Truth, being unchangeable and eternal, does not need their protection. It stands over the whole dispute like the sky over a fence quarrel, indifferent to which neighbor shouts the longest. And then he draws the line that may be the most memorable in the chapter. The follower of self takes up arms against others. The follower of truth takes up arms against himself. All the combative energy of a human life is conserved in that sentence. Only the direction of it changes. The one war worth fighting turns out to be interior, waged not against neighbors, but against one's own suspicion, one's own temper, one's own endless need to win. He is equally clear that the surrender of self is not theatrical. It is not accomplished by giving up fine clothing, or riches, or certain foods, or by speaking smooth words, and it cannot be secured by moving somewhere holier. A man may renounce the world outwardly, Allen says, and isolate himself in a cave or in the depths of a forest, and he will carry all his selfishness in with him and sit with it in the dark. And a man may remain exactly where he is, keeping every duty of an ordinary life: the kitchen, the ledger, the garden gate, and renounce the inward enemy completely. To live in the world without being owned by it, he says, is the highest perfection and the most blessed peace. The hermitage guarantees nothing, and the kitchen forbids nothing. What changes is not the address, but the allegiance. If the choice is really so plain, 'tis fair to ask what finally moves a person to make it, and Allen's answer is a tender one. Usually, he says, it is sorrow. Disappointment when cherished plans are thwarted, remorse over conduct, the sting of another's slight, the ache when someone does not become what we hoped. All of it in his reading is the suffering of self, the friction of clinging. Men pass from self to truth, he says, through the dark gate of sorrow, because sorrow is what finally loosens the hands. He does not say this to frighten anyone. He says it the way a doctor speaks of a fever breaking, and sorrow at its extremity, he adds, is the very doorstep of truth. What feels like loss is, in his account, tuition. And the reward of the surrender, in his telling, is not diminishment, but relief. The person in whom self has loosened has no case left to argue, nothing to guard, nothing to hide, and therefore rests. Grudges become too heavy to be worth carrying up the hill. Old arguments lose their taste. Something in the heart that was braced for contest all its life stands down at last, like a garrison at the end of a long war, and the ground it defended turns out to be quiet farmland after all. There is even a nightly rehearsal of this, familiar to everyone. When the body lies down and the day releases its grip, the opinions are set aside, the claims fall silent, the bells of both houses stop ringing. Sleep, in its small and merciful way, takes the side of the better master and asks the whole case to rest until morning. Nothing needs defending now. The ground that was contested all day is, for these few hours, at peace. Chapter 13. Entering the Infinite. Think of the sea on a rough night, a few miles of it, under wind. At the surface everything is motion, water heaped up and driven, spray torn from the tops of the waves, not one still yard of it anywhere. And a little way down, a few fathoms only, the disturbance thins and fades and gives out entirely. And there is water the storm has never touched and cannot touch. Water that does not know the weather exists. That picture sits at the very center of the closing chapters of The Way of Peace, and it carries the largest claim James Allen ever made. The claim is that the world itself is built like that sea, and so are we. In the external universe, there is ceaseless turmoil, change, and unrest. At the heart of all things, there is undisturbed repose. In this deep silence dwelleth the eternal. Everything we can see and touch belongs to the surface, he says, to the weather of things, endlessly changing, endlessly passing away. And beneath it all, holding it all, is something that has never once moved. Then he brings the picture home, out of the universe and into the chest. As there are silent depths in the ocean which the fiercest storm cannot reach, so there are silent, holy depths in the heart of man which the storms of sin and sorrow can never disturb. It is worth noticing what kind of claim that is. He does not say such depths can be constructed by effort, or earned by merit, or bought with suffering. He says they are already there, in every heart, the way the deep is already under every storm. The still place is not built, it is reached, and the deep does not resist the gale, or argue with it, or wait anxiously for it to end. It simply lies beyond the gale's jurisdiction, and the whole work of the spiritual life, in Allen's telling, is learning the way down. He explains our restlessness with another figure drawn from the same waters. The smallest drop of water detached from the ocean, he says, contains all the qualities of the ocean, and by the law of its own nature, it must find its way back at last and lose itself in the silent depths it came from. So it is with us. The spirit of man, he says, is inseparable from the infinite, carrying its likeness the way the drop carries the sea, and it can be finally satisfied by nothing smaller. That, for Allen, is the secret history of all our reaching, the pleasures pursued and found wanting, the novelties that go stale in the hand, the strange ache that visits even the sweetest evenings. It is not greed at bottom, it is homesickness. Pain and sorrow are not punishments in this account, but reminders, the tug of the tide on a drop of water a long way inland. And the heart will be restless, he says, until it ceases its wanderings and comes home to the eternal. What stands between us and that homecoming he names with one word, the personality, and he means by it what he meant by self in the earlier chapters, the separate, defended, grasping sense of me and mine. Personality, separateness, and selfishness, he says, are one and the same thing. And here Alan asks for the surrender the world fears most. To the worldly mind, the giving up of the personal self looks like the most grievous of all calamities, the one irreparable loss. And it is, he answers, the one supreme blessing, the only gain that lasts. The image he reaches for is the chrysalis. What is surrendered is not life but a casing, outgrown and gone dark, and the emergence is not a death, though from inside the casing it may look like nothing else. Even our problems, he claims, live mostly in that casing. They exist in the illusions the self creates, and when self is yielded up, they are not so much solved as quietly gone, the way shadows go, not fought off but outshone. If that sounds austere, the door he points to is anything but. The way into the infinite, all through these final chapters, is love, and love of a particular kind. It is said that Michelangelo saw in every rough block of stone a figure of beauty waiting for the master hand to set it free, and Alan borrows the story. Within each of us, he says, the divine image waits beneath a covering of hard accretions, and the hand of faith and the chisel of patience work it slowly loose. What emerges is selfless love. Our human loves are the apprenticeship for it, necessary steps and not mistakes. No soul is ready for the divine love, he insists, that has not first loved a person, with all the clinging and all the grief that come with it. But human love holds to one object and excludes the rest, and so it suffers, and the love it points toward is love with the partiality burned away. Only that love that seeks no personal gratification or reward, that does not make distinctions, and that leaves behind no heartaches, can be called divine. A love like that has no edges to defend and no favorite to lose, and that is why nothing in the world can make it grieve. Alan describes the person in whom this settling has happened, and it is one of the loveliest passages he wrote. Such a person is patient beyond ordinary patience, compassionate without limit, deep and silent and clean of malice. And to be near them, he says, is itself a kind of blessing. Wars and rumors of wars do not shake them, not because they have stopped caring, but because they see storms the way sailors of long experience see them, as weather with an end, passing over depths it cannot reach. Where others grow angry and cynical and quarrelsome, they answer with compassion because they know the whole sea and not only its surface. And then, as the book draws toward its close, Alan turns to the reader with an invitation that could have been written for this hour of the night. Come away for a while from external things, from the pleasures of the senses, from the arguments of the intellect, from the noise and the excitements of the world, and withdraw yourself into the inmost chamber of your heart. There he promises, free from the intrusion of every selfish desire. A person finds a deep silence, a holy calm, a blissful repose. And he adds something worth carrying gently into sleep. Whoever can rest in that inner chamber for 1 minute, or 1 hour, or 1 day, he says, can in time remain there always. The visit teaches the way. If, somewhere in these last few minutes, your thoughts have already begun to loosen and slide beneath the surface of the words, there is no need to gather them up again. Drifting down is a fair translation of the text. The final pages of The Way of Peace are about what a person finds at that depth, and Allen gives it its oldest name, peace. Not the peace of comfort and good fortune, he is careful to say, which is loaned to us by circumstance and recalled without notice, burnt up in the first real trial. But a peace that does not depend on the weather at all, the possession of the selfless heart alone. Reaching it, he says, is a crossing. The dark waters of mortality are crossed while a person still lives, and the traveller stands at last upon a shore where the storms of sorrow do not come. Awake, compassionate, self-possessed, and glad with a gladness that has no end. It is the farthest point his little books ever reach, and he closes there on the far shore with the sea of this world behind him. None of that crossing is asked of anyone tonight. It is enough to know the shape of the claim and to let it be true for 1 night without checking it. Beneath the day's turmoil, beneath the noise and the arguments and the small defeats, there is in you, if Allen is right, a depth the storm has never touched. The surface may go on rippling as long as it likes. You may rest below it, where the water is still and dark and silent, and has been waiting all along. Chapter 14. The Quiet Legacy. Before dawn, on the Devon coast of England, a small town lies asleep between the hills and the sea. We began tonight with this picture, and it is right to end with it. A man is climbing the path above the rooftops, unhurried, in the dark, toward a stone outlook that faces the open water, and there he will sit and be quiet for a while before the day begins. Tradition describes the rest of his day as simply as a timetable. The early walk, the hour of stillness, writing through the morning, the garden in the afternoon. The town is Ilfracombe. The man is James Allen. And this is the last chapter, the one about what he left behind. The facts of his life fit into a few sentences, and most of them we heard at the beginning of the night. He was born in Leicester, in the English Midlands, in 1864, the son of a textile worker. When James was a boy, the family business failed, and his father crossed the ocean to America to look for work, and was robbed there and murdered. The son left school at about 15 to help keep the family, and then spent long years as a private secretary in English manufacturing firms, the kind of work that history rarely bothers to record. Letters taken down, accounts kept, other men's words put in order. Around the turn of the century, he began to write for himself. A first book appeared around 1901, and then, in 1903, came a very small one, its title taken from the book of Proverbs, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." The story goes that Alan judged the little book too slight to publish, and that it was his wife, Lily, who persuaded him otherwise. Whether it happened just that way, no one can now say for certain. His life is thinly documented, and the people who could have told us are long past asking. What is certain is the book itself, As a Man Thinketh, hardly more than a pamphlet, the whole of it readable in an evening. About the time of its publication, the family settled in Ilfracombe, the small town where this night began, and the quiet routine that tradition describes settled around them there like mild weather. He kept writing. Roughly a book a year came from that morning desk, 19 or so in all by the end, small volumes with patient titles. And alongside them, he edited a little magazine devoted to the same ideas. So far as tradition tells it, the life around the books was small and regular. The same hill, the same hour of quiet, the same afternoon garden, and out of that sameness the books came one by one, like fruit off a tended tree. Then, in 1912, at 47, James Allen died, little known outside the circle of his own readers. There were no honours to report, and the world's newspapers had other news that year. A man who had spent his mornings writing about the mastery of thought left the world so quietly that the world, at the time, scarcely noticed he had been in it. What happened next is the part that no one could have predicted. His wife Lily continued the magazine and kept his books in print, year after year, edition after edition, and the smallest book refused to die. In the century since, As a Man Thinketh has sold in the millions across countless editions, and it is widely credited as a foundation stone of the whole modern literature of self-improvement. Writers from Napoleon Hill's generation onward have named it as an influence. Nearly everything that century of writing built, the courses and the systems and the shelves of louder books, stands somewhere downstream of a pamphlet by a private secretary who, the story goes, thought it too slight to print. Legacies are not usually shaped like this. The usual order is fame first, then influence, then the slow fading of both. Allen's ran the other way. The fame never really came, and the influence arrived anyway, and then kept arriving, decade after decade, without a face or a fortune attached. As a Man Thinketh became one of those rare books more famous than their author, the title known where the name is not, and it is hard to imagine a monument that could say more than that. The least famous writer in the whole history of self-improvement became the foundation the rest of it was built on. And that is a strange monument, and a fitting one, for a man whose books keep insisting that the unseen part is the part that matters. It is worth asking in the last minutes of the night why these books are the ones that survived, why his sentences, of all that century's sentences, are the ones a person can still bear to hear read aloud in the dark. Perhaps it is this. Almost everything written since in the name of self-improvement is in a hurry. It raises its voice. It counts the days. It promises much and promises it soon. Allen's pages are not in a hurry. They ask for nothing sudden. They move at the pace of a man walking uphill before dawn, sure that the outlook and the sea will still be there, and their promises are long ones, kept in seasons rather than in days. They assume the reader has time, a whole life of ordinary mornings, and that assumption is itself a kind of rest. Books that trust time can be read at night, and sleep, after all, is the same trust performed with the whole body, the laying down of effort in the faith that the garden goes on growing in the dark. So the legacy is a quiet one, and weighed fairly. It is mostly made of paper. Of the man himself, we know the dates, the towns, the work. Tradition adds the stone outlook and the garden. And where tradition is our only witness, it is fair to hold it gently. But the books are not hearsay. They are still here, still in print, still saying their one thing in their level voice. Near the end of The Way of Peace, there is a sentence that could stand over all of them. To reach this silence and to live consciously in it is peace. A whole century of noise has come and gone since it was written, and the sentence has not needed changing. On the outlook above Ilfracombe, the sky in the east has begun to soften. The sea below takes its first colour, grey, then pewter, then something almost warm. Down among the rooftops, a lamp comes on in a kitchen, and then another, and the town begins to remember its errands. The man rises from the stone seat and starts down the path toward his desk, and we can leave him there, on the morning side of the hill, with his hour of quiet folded away and the day's pages still ahead of him. His work kept. It is keeping still. And your work, listener, whatever it was, is over for tonight. Nothing from these hours needs to be remembered. The garden and the fountain, the two masters, the ladder, the deep still water under the storm, all of it can fall away now like the tide drawing back down the sand. And whatever was worth keeping will keep itself and be there in the morning. Tomorrow, if you want it, the quiet hour he wrote about will be waiting for you somewhere. And if not, that is no failing, because the books will go on waiting too. If, some other evening, you should want the books themselves, the three we have walked through tonight, As a Man Thinketh, Out from the Heart, and The Way of Peace, they live on this channel, read in full, unhurried and unabridged, as patient as a stone outlook above the sea. But that is for another night. This one has done its work. Let the lamp go out kindly now, and the last of the day's thoughts settle all the way down, and sleep well, and sweet dreams.